today's lesson will be about. Today's lesson is going to be about emotions. Now, we all start with a primary set, and as we grow older, we acquire more of them.
When your emotions control your action, it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
This will help. Sit down. Emotions are centered in the lower part of the brain.
It is complicated, yes, but mysterious no longer.
Emotional behavior is largely involuntary.
I can't believe that.
We have certain basic emotions which are controlled subconsciously. Notice your own emotional reactions. What did you feel? What did you do?
Under control, your emotions can make you healthier and happier and improve the lives of people around you.
This is pretty clever.
That's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea.
Well, we're continuing our sermon series on emotions, and the reason, remember, that we started talking about this is because one of the things that is a problem for us in trying to become people who celebrate who God is, who take joy in God and who demonstrate that in the way that we live, is that we have a culture around us that has a tendency to be kind of angry, and that our emotions can become this big stumbling block to living the life of celebration and joy in Christ Jesus that God desires for us. And so we started last week with talking about anger. We talked about a couple emotions previous to that, but last week we started on anger, and we're going to continue with anger this week. And the reason that we're doing that is because you all are very clearly angry people. No, it's actually because we live in such an angry culture. I think that a lot of times we don't realize just how angry of a culture we live in. And it's good for us to understand this emotion because it's really difficult to be a person of celebration and joy in God and be overcome with anger. It's just not, it's not something that most of us are able to accomplish. And so it's good for us to look at anger. We're going to look at our passage today is Psalm 37:8. It says, refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. Now, we talked last week about how anger is an emotion that's given by God. And so it's not that we're to never, ever, ever be angry. Because God has given us this emotion for a reason. Anger is a protective emotion. Anger is something that puts us into action. And it puts us into action very rapidly. You guys know that, right? You know, when you get angry, if you were a parent, you can understand what I'm talking about. You get home from work and you're tired, and there's stuff going on with the kids, and you're just too tired to deal with it. Anybody ever been there? Just too tired to deal with that, right? I mean, that happens to all of us. But then one of the kids will do something that makes you angry. You have trouble getting motivated now? No, you don't, do you? I mean, you're on it now. See, the problem is that even though you're on it now, it's spurred you into actions. A lot of times, the actions that we take when we are angry are not the most productive actions in the world. How many of you have ever been in that situation and then had to go back and later apologize for the things that you did while you were angry? See, it motivated you. It did it did its job. It got you up. It got you moving. It got you motivated. That's what anger is for. It's protective. But then in your anger, you didn't do the things that were necessary to really bring the best out of that situation. And so many times in the Bible, including this psalm, it tells us to refrain from anger. To not live in that place of anger, because in that place of anger, yes, we are motivated to do things, but we don't usually take the time necessary to do the things that are normally helpful. Anger is a motivating factor, but it shouldn't be the only motivating factor or even the primary motivating factor of our lives. So we're going to look at three things today that are, I think, really important to understanding how to get a hold of anger. We're going to look at anger is God's business. God's in the business of being angry, and business is good. No, not quite all that, but anger is God's business. Worship is our business. That's the second thing. Worship is our business. And three, mind your business. So, hey, that'll be a fun one. So anger is God's business, worship is our business, and we need to mind our business. So let's start first of all with anger is God's business. Now here's the thing. Anger, we talked about, is motivating and protecting. And so one of the things that's interesting is as a culture, we really have a hard time with God's anger. And this is really fascinating to me because while we have a hard time thinking about an angry God, we don't like thinking about an angry God, most of us don't have too hard of a trouble or a hard time thinking of ourselves as being angry. We're very comfortable with our anger and very uncomfortable with God's anger. Do you see a problem there? It's kind of backwards, isn't it? We should be comfortable with God's anger and uncomfortable with ours, and yet we're the opposite. Anger is God's business. God does get angry. Why? Because God desires to protect things of value. God desires to protect things of value. When God sees things of value being threatened, God is moved to protect those things. It talks all the time in the Bible about God's anger being raised against nations or peoples who don't take care of widows or orphans or the people who are vulnerable among them. God's wrath, God's anger is ignited by those things. Why? Because God has a desire to protect those things of value that don't have any natural protection outside of Him. In James chapter 1, verse 19 through 21, it says, "Know this, my brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls." So here James is saying is that, look, the natural state of us as human beings is there is anger in us. We get angry. And that is given to us by God. But in our fallen state, that anger almost never produces something that's worthwhile and good. Almost never. Now, it does motivate us to action, but generally the actions it motivates us to are the wrong ones. And so what James is saying is be very slow to anger. Be quick to listen. Be quick to hear the other side of things. Be quick to find out what's actually going on. Have you ever done that? Have you ever charged in? I was reading this article by a guy who was talking about how he would get angry. And this is, I think, a lot of us. He gets angry, but he doesn't do anything about it. And so his therapist or a friend or somebody tells him, hey, you need to start letting that out. You need to start being more assertive. Have you ever heard that? You need to start doing that. And so he decided, I'm going to be assertive now. And he goes up to... He's on a ski trip, and there's this huge long line of people that he's in at the chairlift, and nobody's getting on. And he's sitting there waiting, and he's getting more and more angry. He's finally like, I don't understand what's going on. And then he kind of walks up the line a little bit to see what's going on. And he sees that the guy who's running the chairlift is just sitting down, just sitting there. And nobody's doing anything. Nobody's saying anything. And so finally he decides, I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to assert myself. And so he says, hey, why aren't you getting people on the chairlift? And the man very meekly and very apologetic says, I'm sorry, but I've just had a heart attack. I'm waiting for the ski patrol to take me down the mountain. Everybody in the line just glared at him. Why? Because he didn't know what was going on. But he was angry and he was motivated to do something in that moment. See, here's the problem that we have. And so the interesting thing is James here, he has an antidote for this that's actually found other places in Scripture. And his antidote here is meekness. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word. Receive with meekness. Be meek. Other parts of the Bible tell us to be humble. Why is it so clear from the biblical perspective that meekness or humility is one of the keys to dealing with anger? Well, it's because anger happens when we feel that something of value is being threatened. And primarily what we feel like is being threatened is we feel like our glory is being threatened, and that's when we usually jump into action. When people feel like they're being treated without any kind of value. And so when we feel our own value being threatened, our own glory, the thing that, we feel like people are treating us with contempt or just no value at all, our anger springs into action. And what humility says is, wait a second, hold on. In James chapter 4, verse 10, it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. Here's one of the interesting things about the Bible. You know, so many times when we're listening to sermons like this, it's easy to say, well, what God is trying to say is just be a doormat. Then no, that's not what God's saying at all. God is actually saying something very, very perceptive about the way that our lives function. You see, God understands that you actually need glory. God knows that. And in fact, He's built into the system of love that permeates everything in existence. He's built glory into that system. In fact, it goes all the way back to the Trinity. In John chapter 17, verse 1, it says, when Jesus had spoken these words, He lifted up His eyes to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about this. Does it seem weird to hear Jesus saying, Father, glorify your Son? Glorify me. God, Father, glorify me. That doesn't seem like a very humble prayer, does it? In fact, it's an odd prayer, and it's difficult for us to imagine Jesus saying that. Jesus sits there and He prays to His Father, glorify me! But it actually isn't weird at all. God actually knows that we need glory. You need to feel like you're worth something. You need to feel like you have value. You need to feel like there's something good about you, that there's something special about you, that there's something glorious about you. Everybody needs to feel that. And if you lose enough of that feeling, you crawl into a hole, and that's where you live out the rest of your days. And that's a terrible thing to see, and all of us have seen people do it. It's a terrible, terrible thing to see. God knows that you need glory, and God's desire is to glorify you. Isn't that crazy? God's desire, the God of the universe, His desire is to glorify you. Throughout the Bible, it talks about Jesus sharing His glory with us. God's desire is to glorify you. In fact, He created you as a reflection of Himself. He created you in His image. God desires to glorify you. What's happening here with Jesus is something that's really, really fascinating, and this is what is kind of fundamental to the Trinity and to the relationship that goes for all eternity, is Jesus is saying, glorify me so that I can glorify you. That's a relationship of love. And that's when you know when you're in a relationship of love. When your desire is not to glorify yourself, but to glorify the other person. And if you do get glory, you use that glory to glorify the other person. That's what Jesus is saying. Glorify me so that I can show everybody how amazing you are, how awesome you are, how fantastic you are. You see, this is the way that it works in the Trinity. The Father loves and desires to glorify the Son, and the Son loves and desires to glorify the Father. And they're not worried about their own glory. They're worried about the others' glory. Jesus wants glory so that He can return that glory to the Father, so that He can glorify the Father, because it's hard to glorify something when you don't have any glory. You know this, don't you? Like when you don't have any glory, you can't really glorify something else. Imagine going down and seeing somebody who's kind of living in a cardboard box, and they're dirty and they're very unkept, and they say, hey, you know what's a really good investment? Put all your money in this stock that I have right here. Put all your money in this stock. I did it, and I think you should too. Most of us will probably say, thanks, and walk away, right? Now here's the other, imagine somebody who's worth billions of dollars and he says, hey, you know, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to let you in on a secret. You know how I got all my money? This great thing right here. I invested everything I had in it, everything that I had, and this is what's been the result. Which one of those carries more weight with you? Do we need to ask that question? No, we don't. It's obvious, right? So here's the thing. Jesus is saying, You know how I have the glory that I have? It comes from the Father. He is so glorious that I invest everything in Him. I invest everything in Him. I withhold nothing from Him. Even if He asked me to die on the cross, I withhold nothing from Him. And what was the result of Jesus dying on the cross? That He was elevated, that He was lifted up, that He was made seated at the right hand of the Father and given all glory in heaven and on earth. Why? To the greater glory of the Father. Jesus takes the form of a servant, empties Himself of the glory that He had with the Father, takes on the form of a servant, lives a life here on earth, is obedient to death on cross like a criminal, is humiliated. But He doesn't stay humiliated. The Father elevates Him. Jesus on the cross leaves justice and retribution in the Father's hands. You see, they're hanging Him on the cross. They're putting Him to death like a common criminal, like someone who has no glory at all. Because that's really, when you put a criminal to death, that's kind of the worst. You're saying this person is so bad, they lack so much glory, that they shouldn't even be alive. And that's what we said about the Son who created everything in existence. And rather than defend His glory, what did Jesus do? He left that in the Father's hands. Why? Because the Father can be trusted with His glory. The Father can be trusted with His glory. Do you think that if the Father can be trusted with Jesus' glory, that we can trust Him with ours? In Romans chapter 12, verse 19, it says, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." You see, anger is God's business. That's what I'm saying here. Wrath is God's business. Don't take it on yourself. Leave it to Him. Do you think you're going to do a better job? Have you seen some of the Old Testament? I mean, can you match that? Probably not. Here's the thing, it's safe in God's hands. And not only is God have way more anger, wrath, vengeance than you could ever possibly imagine, God knows how to judiciously use it for the glory of everything in creation. You see, the problem is that even if I could match God's level of wrath and anger, even if I could match that, there's no way that I would use it the right way. Can you imagine how terrible it would be? Imagine having the ability to have as much wrath or anger as exists. Oh, how terrible your life would be. I can't imagine anything worse. You would have destroyed everything in your life. And yet God can have all of it and use it to create something glorious, something good, something worthy of honor and praise. See, one of the things that we have to differentiate in our lives is we have to look at the difference between glory and honor. You see, one of the things that we know innately as human beings is that we need glory to survive, and so we fight each other over it. But really, what we're doing is we're fighting over honor, not glory. You see, glory is the existence of goodness. It's the existence of something that's amazing. It's the existence of something that is light and fame and weight. It's the existence of goodness. And honor is what people pay to glory. Honor is glory recognized. How many of you have ever received an honor? Any kind of honor? Maybe you made the dean's list. Maybe what was that the glory? Was the little certificate you got, was that the glory? Is that why you went through all that? You know, we have people here who are in education. Is what you're really hoping for as a student who's all about the piece of paper at the end? Is that the kind of student you're looking for? Somebody who just wants the certificate. I just want the piece of paper. You see, the piece of paper is the honor, the knowledge that you gained, becoming a more enlightened person, becoming a more wise person, becoming a better person. That is the glory. You see, the problem is, though, we mistake glory for honor all the time, and when people don't give us honor, we get mad. But we have to understand, that's not the glory. That's the honor. The reality is that when you become more like Christ, when you become more like God, that is the true glory. And even if not a single person in the world recognized it, that glory would still be yours. And there'll become a day when Jesus says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And I'm telling you that that is the only honor you will ever need for the glory that God has given you. There's nothing that can compare with that honor. When Jesus, the creator of the universe, says, "Well done to you, good and faithful servant," you've reflected me in a way that brings me glory. That's the only honor you ever need. And so don't fight over honor. In fact, don't even be too quick to desire it, because it comes with its own set of problems. I've told you guys before the story, and it's the only story I have about meeting an actual honest-to-goodness celebrity. I was a teenager, and I was at Magic Mountain. And I'm not kidding you. This is a true story. I was at Magic Mountain, and who did I see standing over by this restaurant with a Coke in his hand? Magic Johnson. Yes, Magic Johnson was at Magic Mountain. Where else would he have been? And I was like, whoa! And the funny thing is I saw people going up and shaking this guy's hand. I didn't realize who it was at first. Then I was like, that's Magic Johnson. And so, being a teenager, I went up and said, I'm going to shake his hand too. And I went up and said, "Hey, how you doing?" And shook his hand. He's like, "Nay." I was much more excited to meet him than he was to meet me. I can guarantee you that he did not go home and said, "Hey, you know who I met at Magic Mountain today? Steve Williamson. He was there." He didn't say that at all. He was barely containing his anger. Why? Because I was being a punk. I was being a punk. You know why I was being a punk? Can you imagine how terrible it would be to go to Magic Mountain as Magic Johnson? Can you imagine how terrible it would be? An endless parade of people just coming up. Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? How you doing? You don't have 1 minute's peace to yourself, and I was part of that parade of people. Hey, how you doing? I didn't think for a second about, man, leave the poor guy alone. I didn't think about him or his experience at all. I thought about me and how I'd like to tell people like you that I met him at Magic Mountain. Because I was a teenager and I didn't know any better. Man, now I look at it and I think, what a poor, poor man. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. I just look at it and I just look at this resignation, a little bit of anger, and just why on his face. You know, he's not going to yell at us. But he just wanted to be left alone. That's something that they don't tell you before you get into these paths that lead you to being a celebrity. Don't crave honor too much, because you know what? It comes with a lot of strings attached when it comes in this earth. So let's look at the second point that we need to understand, and that's worship is our business. So anger is God's business. Let's let Him take care of our problem. Let's put our honor and our glory in His hands. But secondly, what is our business then? What are we going to do? What is it that we do in this world? Well, we worry about not our honor and glory, but we worry about God's honor and glory. What honors and glorifies God? What are the things that give God honor and glory? There's a lot of people who have a lot of ideas about this. I've told you guys about the fact that there was a place when I went to college in Missouri. There was a donut shop that wasn't too far away from our school that sometimes I would skip chapel to go and get donuts there. And there was a list when you walked in. There was this like screen door that came off somebody's house, and you would open that and you go in. And there was a list on the wall next to the prices of donuts. There was a list on the wall of everybody who was going to hell. And I don't mean like actual personal names. I mean just like, adulterers, fornicators, liars, cheat, like all of that. There was just this big list. And I would be willing to bet, I never read the whole thing, but I bet if I got closer to the bottom, it would be people who skipped chapel at Ozark Christian College to get donuts. I was probably in that list down there at the bottom. Now here's the thing, these people were Christians, but they thought that this was a great way of glorifying God. And people all over the world have different ideas about what honors and glorifies Him. You know, one of the things that I find very fascinating is when Jesus was on this earth, how did He engage with people? Matthew chapter 9, verse 36 said, when He saw the crowds, He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. You know, one of the things that I've found most interesting in the last few years of my life is that if you haven't grown up with a knowledge of God and who He is, then the world doesn't look to you like it does to me. And this is something that, because I grew up a Christian, from the time I was young, my dad was a pastor, and I grew up and I saw the world in a certain way, and I was taught to see the world in a certain way, and I just saw the world in that way, and I didn't understand the gift that I'd been given. I didn't understand how amazing a gift that was. I didn't understand that. I thought that everybody saw the world like this, and I couldn't understand. And I remember sometimes there were people in my family whose attitudes when they'd see people off sinning would be like, just very condemning of that. And I'm not saying that the action or the sin itself isn't worthy of being condemned. It is. But that's not the way that they looked at it. They looked at like condemning the people. Oh, these people are just terrible. They're just awful. And there was a lot of that I realized that seeped into the way that I saw the world. And in the last few years, one of the things that I've come to understand is that when you don't grow up knowing who God is, you don't know what glory is, you don't know what goodness is, you don't know what those things are, then the world looks like a very different place to you. And I never understood that passage about how Jesus looked at people and He saw them as harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. I never understood that until the last few years of my life. But that's the way that Jesus saw people. You know what gives glory to God is when we love Him and we love others the way that He does. That's what gives glory to God. Does that mean that you never tell somebody that they're sinning? No, sometimes you got to tell them. But it has a huge, profound effect on the way that you tell them. It has a huge, profound effect on the way that you engage with them. It has a huge, profound effect about the fact that their sin actually hurts you because it hurts God and it hurts them. You don't sit there and go, well, yeah, they're not as good as me. What's really fascinating is Jesus emptied Himself of the glory that He had, and He came and He became a servant. Why? Because this is the nature of who God is. This is the nature of how God loves us. That's the nature of who God, that's who He is. It's not putting on a show. He's not doing something for attention. It's not a photo op. That's the nature of who He is. That He loves us so much that He's willing to give up glory with the Father and come and live the kind of life that He lived and die the way that He died because of His love for us. Jesus had compassion. And when we take on the character and nature of God, that's when we are glorifying Him. We were made in His image, and glorifying Him, living in that image, is what is in our care. Lifting Him up and making Him glorious to the people around us. We were talking this morning in our Sunday school class about building the city. And one of the things that's interesting, I did some study on building the city this week, and the city doesn't just mean like it means the group of people, basically. And when you build the city, there's always authority. And there's always in human cities, in human groups, there's always people with authority and people without. And the question is, there's this dilemma that's always existed from the beginning of the world, is that the person with authority kind of betrays the person beneath him and uses his authority to glorify himself. And then the person under authority, they rebel against that authority because they say, why should I do this? And what's really fascinating is when you look at the city the way that it's intended, that all authority is given to glorify. I know people in this room who have been teachers, who are teachers. And you have authority in your classroom. And you're given that authority for a reason. It's a profound reason. It's an important reason. And it's why you can't lay your authority down. You see, that's a mistake that we often make. We say, well, I care about something, so I'm going to lay my authority down. I care about my kids, so I'm going to lay my authority over them down. I care about my students, so I'm going to lay my authority down. That's a profound mistake. It's a misunderstanding of authority and what it's for. See, God has given you authority to glorify your students. And that's what you do. You're teaching them something. You're giving them a valuable skill. You're giving them valuable knowledge. When they're done with you, there'll be something then that they weren't before they came into your life. You're glorifying them. That's what all authority does. And when we live a life that's glorifying to God, we end up glorifying those around us. You see, there's really two different ways you can live in this world. One is to try to get as much glory for yourself as you can. The other one is to understand that God is in charge of your glory. And your job is to glorify Him and glorify those around you as much as you possibly can. And I can tell you, one of those paths of life will make you incredibly joyful, and the other one will make you intolerably miserable. And most of us have seen down both of those paths enough to know that that's true. Well, thirdly, we need to mind our business. So what about godly anger? So here's the problem that we need to now contend with. Is we've talked about kind of why you want to avoid anger, but then we have to deal with the passage that we had from last week, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. Let's read that again. It says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger." So what are we supposed to do about that? Well, first of all, the vast majority of the time, you just put the anger in God's hands. It's His business. It's His thing to deal with. The vast majority of the time, that's true. Well, when is that not true? It's not true when you have been given authority in a situation and something of value is being threatened, and you're the person whose job it is to protect that thing. Now, that's not going to be a ton of times. I mean, that narrows it down quite a bit. Because let's face it, most of the time we don't have authority. Most of the time we don't have authority. And so the thing is that narrows down the field quite a bit. But when we do have authority and something that we are in charge of that has value is being threatened, well, then it's time to be angry. God is angry. What's God angry about? Well, Romans chapter 1, verse 18 tells us. This is one of those passages that we don't like because it talks about the anger and wrath of God. But I'm telling you, don't look at it the way that you used to look at it. Look at it the way that God intends it. We want God to be angry because we want God to want to protect things of value. Romans 1:18, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." So what makes God angry? The thing that makes God angry is when the truth of who He is and the way that God desires to love us and glorify us, when that is being destroyed, when that truth is being destroyed, when that truth is being suppressed by all of our ungodliness and our wickedness. Because not only are we destroying things of value that God loves, but we're making it so that people can't even see the truth about the most valuable thing that exists, and that is God. How many of you have ever met anybody that's so angry and hurt that they cannot or will not believe in God? Anyone? Some of us maybe have been that person. And there's reasons why that's the case. And the Bible acknowledges that. That's what this passage is acknowledging. That we sometimes are so terrible to each other that it makes it almost impossible to believe that there could be a God that loves us. And there's reason to think that. When you look out into the world, there's reason to believe that there isn't a God and they couldn't possibly care about us because we are so awful to each other so much of the time. You know what? That makes God angry. And could we respect Him if it didn't? If God was just okay with that, could we? It makes Him angry. So what does that mean for us? Make sure that in your life, you're not being part of that. Mind your business. Glorify God. 99% of the time, what needs to be on our minds is how we need to avoid being part of that problem. 99% of the time, what should be on our minds is, how do I avoid this problem? How do I do the opposite of this? How do I make it clear that there is a God who exists and that God does love us and desire to glorify us because I'm loving people and desiring to glorify them? That should be 99% of the time what all of our attention is focused on. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, it says this. It says, we do not struggle or we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. You know what our fight is against? Even when we're angry, when you're getting angry, something that you have authority over, it's being threatened, it's good and it's being threatened, and you need to get angry. You know what we fight against? You know what our anger should be directed against? It's not other people. It's the spiritual forces of this present darkness. What does that mean? When it talks about rulers, authorities, cosmic powers in this present darkness against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. What is it talking about? It's talking about that the thing that person who's threatening what you hold dear, your real enemy is not that person, it's the ideas that person has. It's the ignorance, it's the lack of knowledge, it's the lack of knowing who God is, it's the lack of, that's what your enemy is, that, not the person. And so when we're angry, we should be angry at these ideas. We should be angry about these things that threaten the knowledge of God. And we should want to free the people who are in thrall to them from them. Well, we have one more sermon on anger next week because we need to learn to fight correctly. In our anger, there are times when we're going to need to move, we're going to need to act. And we need to know how to do that well, how to do that correctly. So that we'll work on that next week. But for this week, let's talk about the application. First of all, believe in the glory of God and in His desire to share that with you. Man, if you can get a hold of that, if you can get a hold of the fact that this God is so great and so glorious, and His desire, because of His love for you, is to share that with you, man, it changes the way that you look at the world. Secondly, belong to Him through the covenant and share His glory. You know what the thing that's so fascinating is God loves us so much that He wants to unite Himself to us so that He can share everything that He is and everything that He has with us. It's like somebody wanting to say, hey, I want to adopt you as a child. I happen to have a few $1 billion and a lot of things, and I'm a good person. I know how to teach you things, and I want to adopt you as a son and bring you into my household and share everything that I have with you. Man, if you had that opportunity, you would jump at it. That's what the God of the universe is offering. He's offering everything that He is and everything that He has, and to share that with you. And lastly, become glorious by being transformed by His Spirit. When you really desire in your heart, not to glorify yourself or to get yourself honor, but to glorify God and to glorify the people around you, that transformation that happens in your spirit makes a life worth living. And God desires to give us so much. Don't let anger get in the way.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at www.fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.